that okay?
Thank you. Okay, thanks very much, Yasmin, and thanks for inviting me back. 21 years at the end of this year since I left Marcus Oldham, and I've only been back on one occasion. It's great to see a few familiar faces here and a couple of my favourite lecturers still around. I suppose I'm referring to Ian Farron when I say one of my favourite lecturers, because ag engineering was always one of my favourite subjects. But also Sam Ingles being here, and of course I reckon I was the worst student he's ever had, because animal production was the least thing I was interested in and really didn't care, but we always got on pretty well. Obviously I'm the last speaker today. There's been 4 previous speakers speaking about pretty much the same topic. So some of what I'll speak about today will be a bit of a rundown on our business, what I've done in the 21 years since I left here, and then in the later part of the presentation we'll address the topic we've been asked to speak about. So as Yasmin said in the introduction, I'm a 4th generation fruit grower from our family. My great-grandfather moved to where we are in the Huon Valley in 1944. So he had 6 brothers that were all fruit growers on the Tasman Peninsula, and he really moved to where we are now because he saw bigger blocks of ground, more opportunity for irrigation, and he thought he'd be able to grow his business. When my father started growing apples, as the 3rd generation of our family to grow apples, there were 2,000 apple growers in Tasmania. When I started 25 years later, there were 200 apple growers in Tasmania, and today we've got only about 20 left of full-time growers. So that means a massive amount of change for an industry and a community, and a significant change in the amount of employment, etc., etc. So when I was leaving here, things weren't looking that positive. If I looked at my father's career, he'd seen a lot of his colleagues disappear, so it made me think about things a little bit. But if we just look at the history for a minute, really Tasmania was developed for counter-seasonal supply into the Northern Hemisphere. Apple exports peaked in about 1966 with 6.5 million cartons. Back then they virtually all went to Europe and North America, and they were all picked and packed basically straight off the tree, no storage, no cool storage, no long-term storage of fruit. They were basically picked, put on a ship and sent to the other side of the world. But in the late 1960s and 1970s, things really started to change, and there was probably the most significant thing is apples have a reserve of starch, so an apple can keep breathing for a long period of time. We put them in controlled atmosphere cool stores, reduce the amount of oxygen in the air and lower the temperature, and it means they respirate a lot more slowly, so we can keep them for an extended period. So of course all of a sudden the Northern Hemisphere didn't require fruit from the Southern Hemisphere to the extent that it used to. Also Australia had its own currency, and there's a massive devaluation against the European currencies, and the market demand disappeared. And back in the 1970s there was actually a federally funded tree pull scheme where people were actually paid to remove their orchards. Thankfully our family didn't do that, and my father was one of the early ones to develop CA stores, and so at that peak time of families exiting our industry in the 1970s, my father often says it was some of the most profitable years we had, because he'd already built some cool stores by that stage, and he was storing fruit that was picked in March and April, holding it in store and selling into the domestic Australian market in October and November when there was no fruit around. Through the 1980s and 1990s, basically production was dominated by one variety, which was Red Delicious. We moved completely from selling in Europe and North America to the whole business was Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan. But over time we started to see increasing competition in those markets, and particularly from our other Southern Hemisphere competitors. So Chile, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, all started supplying into those markets, and that was when we had probably 10 years of the main market for Tasmanian apples being the Indian subcontinent. But in time we started seeing more competition into that market as well, and of course Northern Hemisphere fruit. The other thing was sort of through all that period we had a steadily rising Australian dollar. We've heard about import duties, etc., this morning, and really the nail in the coffin for exporting apples out of Tasmania came in about 2010 when we lost our international shipping service out of Tasmania. We've just had one start again, but that's, you know, it's quite significant because we can get a container of apples, say from Melbourne to virtually anywhere in Asia, for about $1,500. Well, it costs us $3,000 to get the bloody thing from Tasmania to mainland Australia. But when we used to be able to send them direct out of Tasmania, you know, we could get them to Singapore or Malaysia or the Philippines. We can get them there cheaper than we can get them to Melbourne, so we have a chance of being competitive. But we are seeing some, as I say, there's a new service that's already operating where it's I think a weekly service, so hopefully that'll change. But, you know, we talk about the Indian market. It was very important for a few years. It gave growers time to change, and so there was a market opportunity there in India. I think at the time we were going there, we were paying a 56% import duty, and so it's very difficult to compete when you're paying an import duty like that, but it did buy us a little bit of time. I spent my prac year in New Zealand, and I was very lucky. Graham McConnell, that was the principal of the college at the time, he had two contacts in New Zealand that when I said I'd like to go there and work in the fruit industry, I ended up being offered positions with both companies, but I ended up working in Hawke's Bay, and the guy that I worked for there, he was not so innovative, but he had a grower that he packed for that was just outstanding. And what I learnt in that year probably, you know, put us on the course that we're still on in terms of apple growing. And you can see the picture on the left-hand side. You know, that was the sort of orchard that was on our properties when I left college. So, you know, they were big old trees. They were 5 metres apart by 5 metres, or about 400 trees a hectare. Virtually all the fruit was up off the ground, so you had to use ladders to do all the work. And, you know, ladders are dangerous, and as soon as you put someone on a ladder, they only get about half as much work done because it's a lot slower. But what I saw, this guy in New Zealand, a guy by the name of Tony Gilbertson, I reckon he was 20 years ahead of his time, and he was developing high-density orchards of more intense planting systems. So instead of 400 trees a hectare like we've got up in the top left-hand corner, we started planting trees like the ones in the bottom right-hand corner with about 3,000 trees a hectare. We're able to get them into production a lot quicker, and we're able to produce more tonnes per hectare. We're able to have a bigger percentage of the crop that could be picked from the ground, and it was a simpler system. It was easier to explain to people, and importantly, we were able to get it in production quickly. But at the time I left here, you know, our company had a reasonable amount of debt. My father had expanded in about 1987. So I'll say again, I left here at the end of 1994, and by the time I got home in 1995, none of that debt that had been taken on in 1997 had been repaid, and so, you know, things weren't looking that promising. But, you know, I was pretty optimistic about a career in horticulture. The other thing I'd seen in New Zealand was that the main part of our business being apples at the time, and Red Delicious apples, that we were selling for about $17 into Asia at the time, and the Kiwis with fruit just as good, the same stuff, and they were getting $8 for it. So we thought, well, you know, mostly they were selling theirs into Europe and North America rather than Asia, but we thought, well, it's not going to take them long to start supplying Asia, and, you know, we won't be able to get a return enough to sustain ourselves, so we need to do something pretty quick. But what I'd seen from Tony with these high density orchards enabled us to have a bit of direction, but because we couldn't afford to do the expansion that we wanted to do, because developing orchards and those high density orchards is so expensive. You know, we're looking at $70,000 to $80,000 a hectare. So I had my first trip to Europe in '96, and we basically learnt to grow our own nursery trees. And a nursery tree is a capital item from a tax point of view, and we're allowed to depreciate it over the life of the orchard, but you're not allowed to depreciate it until you pick the first crop. So you spend all this money, you can't claim any of it as a tax deduction until they're about 3 years old, and even then you can only do it over the life of your orchard. But you see the picture in the bottom left-hand side, that's a tree coming out of our own nursery. If we grow the trees ourselves and the cost of producing them is just a normal cost of business, we are writing that cost off 100% in a year of expenditure. So we're able to plant these new orchards and make them 100% tax deductible by establishing our own nursery. We've really changed the apple business away from the commodity varieties. I've got listed down the left-hand side the ones that have been a success, and Royal Gala, Pink Lady and Fuji have been, you know, the varieties that have been really successful for us in the last few years. But going forward, we're really not interested in planting anything that doesn't have a trademark. And by that, you know, we're not internationally competitive in this country because of the cost of our labour, and I've got a slide coming up, but compared to our nearest competitor in New Zealand, our labour cost is twice the price of theirs. Compared to our South American competitors in Chile, South Africa and Argentina, our labour cost is 10 times the cost of theirs. So we can't be internationally competitive. But when we've got something that's got a trademark on it, there's someone in Australia that controls that trademark, that has the licence, and so they'll only bring that trademark, bring fruit from another country into Australia at a time that suits them from a market perspective, and of course that's going to be when we haven't got local supply. So we're quickly trying to get half our apple production into varieties that have got a trademark, so we've got that part of our business protected from imports. The one that's been most successful is Jazz. So Jazz is a variety we're growing under licence to New Zealand. It's, you know, been the most successful new variety introduction. We're the second biggest grower of it in the country behind the Montague family, and you know, we're planting a lot more apples. We've just planted the largest volume of apples we've planted in 1 year, probably in our company history, because we still see a future in it, and we see it as a really good way to keep people employed between cherry seasons, which has become our main business. Just two more slides on apples. In 2014 we sent the first ever Australian apples into China. China is the biggest apple grower in the world. It makes no sense that we can send apples there and make any money out of them, but we're working with an online retailer there, so there's no one sharing, you know, there's no supply chain. We're supplying to the online retailer, he's delivering it to someone's home. So if there's a margin to be had, we're not having to share it with anyone. We did a launch over there with our Premier, and you know, and I think it's going to turn into pretty consistent business. I think we've done 6 or 7 40-foot containers of apples into China so far this season. We've recently also acquired a Pink Lady licence. So Pink Lady is an Australian bred apple, and so we're able to export that out of Australia into whichever market. We've supplied stuff into 5 different markets this year, and it's going pretty well. And we talk about ice to the Eskimos. So I said China's the biggest apple producer in the world, and the variety they grow the most of is Fuji. We've just rebranded this Fuji apple as a Tasmanian Tiger Fuji, and it's gone gangbusters. We could have 20 times the volume of them, and we'd still sell them all, and you know, probably selling over there at, you know, 10 times the price of the local stuff. Anyway, on to cherries. So when I did my research project here in 2004, so that's not the year of 1994. I did it looking at the opportunity for growing cherries. Cole Hacking was the lecturer that marked the project, and he gave me 95%, which I was stoked about. But I thought, well, this has got to be worth a crack. So the following year we planted about 400 trees, and we've gone on to plant cherries every year. But really the objective of that research project was to try and find another horticultural crop where again we had a counter-seasonal supply opportunity in the Northern Hemisphere. If you look at a map of the world, there's not actually that many people in the Southern Hemisphere, so the big markets are all in the Northern Hemisphere. Cherries don't have a reserve of starch like apples, so they have a very, very short shelf life from the time we harvest them. So all the cherries we've grown are, you know, what's picked today is packed either today or tomorrow. We're putting it on the Spirit of Tasmania and we're flying it out of Melbourne, so everything's arriving to the customer. Generally it's going to be eaten within 48 hours of it being harvested. So cherries have grown to be the major part of our business. They'll probably make up 75 to 80% of our revenue. We've got a bit over 110 hectares of cherries planted now. We're expecting to pick about 1,500 tonnes of our own this year. Plus we pack for a number of other growers, so we'll probably pack somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 tonnes this year. We're also exporting, because we've built all these good customers through Asia. We're now also expanding and starting to sell some mainland produced fruit. So we're starting off in Griffith in New South Wales. It's got the first, well, they actually come from Hillston in New South Wales. They're packed in Griffith, but they're the first cherries in the Southern Hemisphere. We then go to South Australia for our supply, and then we come to our own supply out of Tasmania. So from Tasmania we have the last cherries in the Southern Hemisphere. So basically we're able to offer our customers, from the one supplier, we're able to offer them cherries for about 4.5 months of the year. And you know, cherries are really, you know, also as diversification, they've really allowed us to grow our business quite significantly, and yeah, we now turn over in a busy morning. We turn over what we turned over in the first year I was there. So we've grown quite significantly. The other major project was that in 2007 we diversified to the Derwent Valley. So even at the time I did my research project, I knew that where we were in the Huon Valley wasn't ideal for cherries because it was a little bit wet. So we went to the Derwent Valley that's got a little bit more than half the rainfall. But land up there at the time we went was worth about 10% of what it was worth in the Huon. There's an abundance of water out of the Derwent River. We only had to ask for it. 45 cents to send them, put a stamp on an envelope, and they gave us 1.2 gigalitres of water, and we'll never be able to use it all. So we've now got close to 100 hectares planted in the Derwent Valley of both apples and cherries, and it's where the main part of our growth is coming from. First time in my life, but the only time in my life that I've got to start from a greenfield site. So we basically bought a great big paddock. There's nothing on it. Everything else I've ever done in the Huon, it's all old orchard ground, and it's uphill and down dale, and every time you put an excavator bucket in the ground, you hit a pipe, or you know, it's always difficult. But this block, you know, the rows there are a kilometre long, and it's what we think's orcharding of the 21st century. Everything's the same from one end to the other. It's all consistent and, you know, really easy to look after. Tasmania's got a unique quarantine status, so the whole market opportunity we've got with cherries comes because we're internationally recognised as being free of fruit fly in Tasmania. Without that status, we wouldn't have a business with cherries. So 92% of our export volume is going to Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Thailand and Malaysia. The other 8% goes to about 8 or 10 different markets. The picture on the top right was the first shipment of cherries going to, we only recently got access to, direct access to China. I think that was probably 2012. So that was the first shipment going up there, and it's not quite I think probably this year coming it'll be our biggest single market. There's one picture I want to go back. I meant to say something at that point. On the photo at the bottom in the middle was my father, Carl. He's just celebrated his 76th birthday a few weeks ago, and one of the objectives, motivations of mine is I want to have a business that's interesting enough and exciting enough that my father wants to still be involved. And at 76 years of age, we can't keep him away. He comes to work every day. But then the next thing on his right is my son, Q, and I want to have a business that's interesting enough and exciting enough that one day the kids might want to be involved. But of course, as we grow, we also need to have a business that's interesting enough and exciting enough that we can keep, you know, key staff motivated and attract those key staff and want to be able to give them the career opportunities that they want to stay with us. So you know, Tasmania, at the time I did my research project, the only cherries in Tasmania were basically sold on the roadside, and it was, you know, effectively a cottage industry. Tasmania now accounts for 44% of the cherries that are exported out of the country, and that volume is going to those markets. So you can see there Hong Kong, which is in brackets China, basically Hong Kong's a grey channel into China, 19% going through the front door of China. Taiwan's been a very significant market and continues to be. South Korea we'll talk about in a second. We've got to have a point of difference. As I said, our labour cost is twice the cost of the Kiwis, 10 times the cost of the Chileans. So we cannot be in the commodity business, because if it's all about cost, we haven't got a hope in hell. So we've got to do something different. So one of the main things we do is fruit size. So we're trying to get, I've got on the bottom there, 60% of our fruit larger than 30 mil. The only thing, or 80% of what we export's in a 2 kilo box. So the photo there on the right, that's in Berlin, and that's €6.90 per 100 grams. So you can call that $100 a kilo at today's exchange rate. So that's the sort of business I want to be in. And we make no excuse for it. We'll tell customers straight up front the first time they meet us, our cherries are the most expensive in the world. And they're the most expensive because we'd like to think they're the best, or we'll convince them they're the best. But they've been grown, what did our Prime Minister once say, at the arse end of the world. It's a long way for us to fly them around the world to the customer. We've got the most expensive labour in the world. We're growing them in a 30-inch rainfall, so the biggest damage to cherries is rain. And so the percentage of the fruit that we put in a first grade box of what's on the tree can be quite low, and obviously that's part of our risk strategy to try and improve that all the time. But I've got there, if the Chileans are producing watermelons, well, we've got to be in a different business and we'll produce pineapples. So we're both doing cherries, but theirs are small and they are red and they are not very sweet. They arrive at the market and they're 48 days old. Ours are big, sweet, hard and crunchy, and they're 48 hours old. I don't quite, we haven't got an AV guy here, but just to put Chile into perspective, there are enough cherry trees in the ground today in Chile to grow 300,000 tonnes. Tasmania will be able to grow 5,000 tonnes. So we're just a grain of sand on the beach, and they're planting at a rate of about 300 hectares a year. Each year, their production's increasing by more than the combined amount of the total Australian and New Zealand crops put together, and their wage rates are US $30 to $50 a day. So we can't get a picker to get out of bed for under 300 US a day. So we've got no chance to compete in the commodity business. If there's can you get it at that slide? My 11-year-old would be really disappointed if we didn't do this. He did this for me at another presentation I had to give. So we probably win. It's better when we've got the sound, but he did that for me. I was speaking at a National Cherry Conference and speaking mostly to mainland Australian growers, and we'd really love to blow the place off the map. The other, we've sort of talked about firmness, but and these next couple of slides of what came out of that presentation to mainland growers, because I really want to understand how we've been able to grow our business so much, and really it is that point of difference. So one is about the size, two is about the firmness. If you ask an Asian customer what's the important quality characteristics, it's firmness, 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 firmness and firmness. That's all that happens. All that counts. Half the time they don't even eat them, but they want to give it to someone else, and they'll give it to someone else, and they'll give it to someone else. If they get eaten, it's probably 10 days down the track, so they need to be pretty firm at the start to still be in decent condition. Tasmania's cool maritime climate gives us a big advantage. It means we don't have the extremes of heat, cold, wet and dry. What happens with a cherry tree is in a really hot environment, when it gets warm, the stomata close and the fruit basically sits there and bakes. That doesn't happen for us, and the cool nights help the fruit to recover. But it is a bit of a barbed wire fence. The firmer the fruit is, the more likely it is to crack if we get a rain event. So it's got to be hard without being too hard. But the penalty for having soft fruit is the fruit probably loses 70% of its value as soon as it's not up to it. The other thing that we've concentrated, and these are simple things, but the other thing we've concentrated really hard on is the cold chain. So the fruit's hydro-cooled within an hour coming off the tree. We've got to just slow their respiration down as quickly as we can. It's a lot easier said than done to keep them cold from the orchard all the way to the other side of the world, but that's what we've got to do to get good out-of-returns consistently. But they've got to be going in the box at less than 1 degree, and if we can put them in the box at less than 1 degree, we're buying a customer a lot of shelf life. The other thing we used to do was pick up every single cherry one at a time. So we've got the most expensive labour in the world. To pick every one up one at a time was expensive and slow, but it's the only way we could guarantee our quality. If we look at what we're charging for these cherries, it's about the price of the flashest bottle of French champagne, or the most expensive chocolate you can buy, or maybe the perfume you might buy for your wife. So there is no compromise. The customer expects them to be absolutely perfect all the time. We used to do it by picking them up one at a time. I was in Melbourne yesterday and we're working on some new machinery to try and rotate cherries better, because we've got to replace all those human eyes with cameras, and we've probably eliminated about half the people from the packing shed, but we need to eliminate the other half pretty quickly as well. We can't talk about export without just talking about the Australian dollar, and you can tell my slide's a bit out of date because it doesn't, we're now at a 75-cent dollar or 73 cents last night, but an average price for a 28mm cherry in Asia is about $75 US CNF, so cargo and freight delivered to the customer. So that $75 US 2 years ago was returning us, I've got a point right here, was returning us $71 Australian. We make that same sale today, so the customer's paying exactly the same at a 73-cent dollar, and our price is up to $102. So, all that extra revenue is going back into our pocket to help make us more profitable and more competitive, and we've done nothing else. So, we can't underestimate the value of a low Australian dollar. So, finally, what I've been asked to speak about, free trade agreements. So, you can read the WTO Director General's definition of free trade agreement. It's worth reading. By withdrawing protectionist measures, improving market access, avoiding policies which distort competition, and striving to agree reforms to global trade rules, governments can boost trade and seize the opportunities that it offers for everyone. Well, I think, hey, shit, isn't that unbelievable? They're talking about a level playing field. Wouldn't that be great? What a novel idea. And as we've heard from a couple of the speakers earlier in the day, we're already starting to benefit from these. If we're not on a level playing field, we're at a competitive disadvantage. So Tasmania's two biggest export markets, as we've said, are Taiwan and China. And both our key competitors, New Zealand and Chile, have already got free trade agreements with those markets. New Zealand's had a free trade agreement with China since October 2008. We're hopeful that by 2020 we might be able to go into China with zero import duty. At the moment, all we have is an agreement to make an agreement. It's not yet ratified, it's got to go through our parliament, it's got to go through theirs, but it's going to be, cherries we think it's going to be stepped down. So current import duty is 10%, I think it goes to 7.5%, goes to 5%, goes to 2.5%, but we're still going to be at a disadvantage for the Kiwis at least till 2020, so for 12 years we've been fighting with one arm tied behind our back in that market. So you put it in perspective, so in Taiwan, where we're paying a 7.5% import duty at the moment, the average price, not last year but the year before, was $18.75, so 7.5% import duty, that's $1.40 a kilo disadvantage we're at. Well, of course, the customer's not going to pay any more than they pay for New Zealand fruit. So that $1.40 a kilo, that comes out of my pocket. And we heard in the previous presentation about the need for investment in Australian agriculture. We don't need other people's money. We just need to be competitive and fix our own profitability, and we'll spend the money ourselves. Or the Australian superannuation companies will find agriculture as being attractive. And if our federal government makes investment in agriculture through accelerated depreciation an interesting place for people to invest, and it's profitable, we can fund it ourselves. And in China, where the average price is $18.90, at 10% is $1.89 a kilo. So that's significant. That's twice what we pay a picker. The biggest cost in our business is labour, and there's twice what we pay a picker. And it's a double whammy, because we have our invoice price, put on top of that the import duty, and then on top of that goes the VAT, but it's all compounding. So that even makes our disadvantage even more significant. And you saw on that previous slide how much Tasmanian fruit's still going through the grey channel, and so it's costing us there, we reckon, $9.20 a 2 kilo to do everything the right way and go through the front door and pay the duties, etc., etc. Our company don't tend to go through the grey channel because we need to be using the front door access, but we could be going through the grey channel for half the price by going through the back door instead of the front door. While Tasmania's exports to China have almost doubled, there's still the same volume virtually going through Hong Kong, so we'd like to see that change. But we're talking about our disadvantage with not having a free trade agreement. While we're in this uncompetitive situation, last year Chile almost doubled the volume that they sent into China alone. So that an extra 37,000 tonnes of fruit. Tasmania grows 4,000, so that puts it in perspective. New Zealand got a free trade agreement with Taiwan, as we know, and a recent report said that the volume in the first year after that agreement was signed in December 2013, their business was up 32% with Taiwan. In the time that agreement's been in place, they've saved 60 million New Zealand dollars in costs that would have been incurred in the market. So where's that $60 million gone? It's all gone into the pockets of the New Zealand growers. What are they doing with it? They're reinvesting in their businesses. They're planting new orchards. You can see 95% of the trade's kiwi fruit, apples and cherries. Well, 2 of those ones are the businesses I'm in. So they've got good levels of margin coming back to them because of that competitive position, which is what's going to position them to go forward. And just interestingly, since New Zealand signed that agreement with Taiwan, Tasmanian cherry exports to Taiwan have halved. What a surprise. We're not competitive, we haven't got an agreement with them, and we're losing a market. But a positive situation. I reckon this was the first time ever, I don't know how we're going with the time, first time ever that we've had a free trade agreement with a country ahead of New Zealand that I know about, and this was with Korea. So cherries benefited from it greatly. We went from a 24% import tariff to 0 immediately on signing. So we gained access to the market on the 1st of January this year. Last year we sent 5 tonnes of cherries to Korea. This year we sent 248. So last year we sent $70 million worth. This year we sent $3.54 million worth. So put us in a competitive position, and immediately we can take advantage of it. But of course, just in the last few weeks, the Kiwis have now signed a free trade agreement, and they'll be working pretty hard to take that market back off us. Even more important than free trade agreements is gaining and holding market access. Tasmania, as I said, is very lucky because of our fruit fly free status. We've got access to China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and workable protocols into Thailand, Indonesia and the United States. all of which mainland Australian cherry growers don't have. The mainland guys are at such a disadvantage. There's been no progress made for their market access in 15 years. If anything, all they've done is gone backwards because they've lost market access to a lot of markets, and you know, they desperately need a couple of wins to be able to stay in business. All of Australia was kicked out of Thailand about 18 months ago. We've just got back in there on the 1st of January, and we basically handed that market to New Zealand. You know, we're not there, so they've got it to themselves. In 2015, they sent 375 tonnes. Our first year back in the market, we sent 68 tonnes. So we're starting to get back, but you know, it's pretty hard to compete when you haven't got market access, and you know, a market like Thailand that's been a good high-value market, that's been, you know, a profitable market for us to operate in, and we've just got to watch all our customers go to a competing country because we've lost our market access. And it's all over the fact that, I can't tell you exactly what it was, one of the products they wanted to sell to Australia, and we were too slow, you know, addressing their import applications, so they just banned all Australian products. Vietnam's in exactly the same boat. And so we're currently banned from Vietnam. Again, we've given the Kiwis a free kick. So you can see there, last year New Zealand shipped 245 tonnes of cherries. 279% growth on what they'd done the year before, because we just let them in. You know, our government is not able to keep the relationship sound enough that we maintain market access, hand it over to them, and you know, we'll spend the next 10 years trying to get it back again. And of course we also lost Russia in the last 12 months. So Russia's been the only European market that we've been able to remain competitive in, and you know, we're not on our own in that one. Most countries in the world have been banned from there. A couple of final things. It's come up in the previous topics, previous presentations about food safety. You know, Australia has the best reputation in the world for food safety, even better than New Zealand. And honestly, I think in Tasmania, we're almost starting to build our own identity in Asia. We had the presidential visit last year, which was fantastic. There was some unbelievable figure, like 279 million hits on the Tourism Tasmania website in 48 hours. Our online customer in China has got up on his website a copy of the report from the Cape Grim Air Quality Monitoring Station that proves that part of Tasmania has the cleanest air of anywhere in the world, and every time he's got a product of ours for sale, he's got that up to prove how clean a place it is. The other thing that's, you know, we're seeing a lot of other countries are trying to, you know, ride on the coattails of Australia's reputation. This photo is 10 years old. So this is the Hansen Orchards 2 kilo carton. This one's obviously made to look like a Hansen Orchards 2 kilo carton, but you see this one says Hansen Orchards Tasmanian. This one says cherries, orchards, green food. But if English characters didn't mean anything to you, you'd look at this one and think you were buying a Tasmanian box of cherries. That's all happening in the market. I'm not suggesting that's happening in a competitive country, but someone in the market is buying Chilean cherries and putting them in that box and trying to pass them off as Tasmanian. A couple of weeks ago we had a food safety scare in Vietnam. As I said, we've been banned from shipping to Vietnam. And someone put on Facebook that they'd been made sick by eating cherries out of one of our brands, the gold one you saw before, 43 degrees south. Well, someone put it on their Facebook, the newspaper picked it up and printed an article about it. Well, there's been no Tasmanian cherries go for 18 months. There's no way in the world Tasmanian cherries would keep till May anyway, but you know, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. And it was a new counterfeit carton of our 43 degrees south one, but what do you do about it? You know, we had no control. So just finishing slide, and it's come up in the previous presentations, but this is fresh fruit import growth into Asia, and you know, you can see most of the markets are not changing much. All the growth is occurring from China, so the opportunity for you guys starting a career in agriculture, there's going to be a lot of hungry mouths there. Thanks very much.